There are many demigods in Elden Ring who seem to have partaken in the Shattering, all claiming a great rune for themselves. Most of these demigods seem to have been successful leaders who inspire intense loyalty amongst their troops. For example, take Melania, the demigod cursed with scarlet rot. It is said that her troops vowed to fight alongside her, despite the inevitable, if gradual, putrefaction of their flesh. There are also Radahn's Redmane troops, that despite their leader losing his mind to the scarlet rot, they still remain loyal to him, by holding a war festival in his honor so as to give their leader a soldier's death. Even the Lord of Blasphemy, Rykard, has a small group of recusants who are pledged against the Order of the Erdtree and the Greater Will, led by faithful Lady Tanith, Rykard's consort. However, there is one shardbearer that stands out amongst this pattern: Godrick the Grafted. Godrick is different because he doesn't share the same strength of character that a lot of the other shardbearers do. In fact, quite the opposite. The army that make up Godrick's loyalists are a ragtag bunch of criminals, mercenaries, or the troops left over from his failed siege at Lanedale. The general consensus in the world of Elden Ring is that Godrick is a dishonest coward who hides away in his castle, even disliked amongst some of his own men. This cowardly nature of Godrick is central to his character, and explains why he indulges so heavily into the demented practice of grafting. Analysing Godrick's occupation of Stormveil will provide us further insight into his deranged behaviour, how the golden lineage has totally fallen from grace, and interestingly, the castle's history and previous occupier, the Stormlord. However, before we begin delving into the castle itself, some context to Godrick's history must be established. It is said that Godrick is the last living member of the Golden Lineage, descendants of Elden Lord Godfrey and Queen Marika the Eternal. We learn from finger reader crone Enia that many generations had passed between Godrick and Godfrey, and as such, Godrick is not a direct descendant of the first Elden Lord, but rather a distant relation whose divine blood had become greatly diluted. Considering how far apart the two are in terms of personality and character, this is not hard to believe. It is presumed that Godrick's lineage to Godfrey and Queen Marika can be traced through their son, Godwyn the Golden. Godrick's connection to Godwyn will become more interesting once we discover the hidden secrets lurking in the depths of the castle. It is possible that Godrick wasn't always so reviled by many in the lands between. On meeting Morgoth the Omen King in the throne room, he refers to the Lord of Stormveil's proper lineage, calling him Godrick the Golden. Additionally, one of the greatsword monuments outside the Stormveil Gatefront also acknowledges Godrick's golden lineage. What's also interesting is that it's implied that Godrick isn't the first in his ancestry to take up the process of grafting. In the Altus Plateau, near the Grand Lift of Dectus, the golden lineage Evergaol can be found. Inside, Godfrey the Grafted, a relation to Godrick, but it is unknown how closely related he was. It is very likely that the grafting process had plagued the golden lineage for some time. Godfrey is evidence of this, and it is possible that Godrick was drawn to grafting because of his ancestry's previous adoption of it. The operation of grafting is core to Godrick's character, highlighting his yearning to return to the golden age of his lineage. I suspect this was a prominent insecurity within the lineage for some time, and this is a theme we will explore together later on. After taking one of the shards from the Elden Ring, it is explained by the noble Kenneth Haight that Godrick fled the capital by hiding amongst the women's folk. He also hid in Stormveil from Radahn, who was in hot pursuit of him, possibly due to the fact that Godrick possessed a shard.
Yes. Now, allow me to furnish you with a little advice. I would take great care to avoid Godrick's Tarnished hunts were I in your shoes. That depraved lot are obsessed with sacrificing Tarnished like you for the sake of grafting. Honestly, Godrick's nothing more than a jumped-up country bumpkin. Lord? Oh, don't make me laugh. First, he hid himself amongst the womenfolk to flee the capital, then hid from Radahn in that castle. Then he insulted Melania, lost to her in battle, only to lick her boots rather than die like a man. Has he no shame? the big girl's blouse. And to think, he's the blood of Godfrey, last of the golden lineage. You almost wouldn't know it to look at him.
It should be noted that at some point in the timeline, Godrick was set on taking the capital and was involved in one of the sieges of Leyndell, only to be demolished by Margit the Fell Omen and the golden armies of the Erdtree. I assume most of Godrick's army was wiped out by this failure. Thus, we reach the present day, where the Tarnished first come to the lands between. Godrick rules over Limgrave, and as such, we can see his troops patrolling the roads, as well as Godrick's influence over Castle Morn. Our journey begins at the Gatefront Ruins. Here, we come across several of Godrick's soldiers, patrolling the vicinity as well as a few of Godrick's knights. The ruins act as a sort of outpost, securing a small area outside the castle grounds. Interestingly, a few wolves can be found within the ruins, perhaps tamed by Godrick's soldiers. Underneath the ruins, in a small passage, the Ash of War Stormstomp can be found, remnants of the former occupier of Stormveil. Close by, a Greatsword Ruins monument is present, describing Godrick's defeat and humiliation to the blade of Mikola. Afterwards, Godrick on his knees and grovelling for mercy. This is supposedly the area where Godrick duelled Melania and lost, as detailed by Kenneth Haidt. One thing to note is that the monument uses the title Godrick the Golden, and so perhaps after this humiliating defeat, in a fit of frustration and insecurity, Godrick would take on the practice of grafting. Overlooking the ruins is the Gatefront, clearly worn down by the passage of time, with roots and vines growing upwards upon the stone walls. Two banners of Godrick's sigil are displayed upon the walls, ripped and torn. The signs of disrepair are to foreshadow the state in which Stormveil is maintained. The banner of Godrick, one side green with the golden Erdtree displayed, whilst the other side red with the beast Sarosh shown. What these symbols represent are very important to Godrick, as we will later see. Inside the Gatefront are two of Godrick's soldiers acting as scouts, overlooking the entrance to Stormveil. Entering the Gatefront, if one looks up, they will be met with a troll, seemingly waiting to crush any who tread onwards. Battle ornaments along with several archers litter the path ahead. Reinforced barricades and spikes block the main path, underpinning Godrick's desire to keep any Tarnished out. These preparations are perhaps justified, considering how the stranded graveyard, the starting point of the Tarnished journey, is in close proximity to Stormveil. Past the archers and barricades, and up the hill, a lone guard can be seen, waiting to surprise the Tarnished with an ambush, where several foot soldiers wait in the bushes. It is not surprising that Godrick would employ such tactics, considering the dishonest nature of his character. Exploring further inland and up the hill, one will immediately notice the dramatic change in weather, as strong gusts of wind are now present. This weather is evocative of the former inhabitants of the area, namely the Stormlord, who once ruled the area in which Stormveil now sits, but was defeated at the hands of Godfrey, first Elden Lord. If one strays left off the main path, an abandoned graveyard is located. The most striking feature of this graveyard is that it is filled with jellyfish spirits, and perhaps this is where Roderica, who has a gift for spirit tuning, found the jellyfish spirit ashes that she later gives to you at Stormhill Shack. Also found in the graveyard is Godrick's soldier ashes. Is it possible that some of Godrick's soldiers are buried here? The item description tells us that the soldiers that serve Godrick are what remains of the army that fled the capital. The implication being that Godrick's army is actually severely diminished, and this will help explain why we find all manner of troops in the castle. Along the fields of the castle grounds, there are several trolls guarding the area. Their sole purpose, it seems, to help defend the castle. Again, Godrick has been forced to use trolls to bulk up his outer defences due to his disastrous defeat at Leyndell and the subsequent destruction of most of his army. The eastern section of Stormhill includes another entrance into the grounds. However, it is not as heavily guarded, with a few petty foot soldiers, some raggedy dogs, and a knight to maintain the perimeter. One can assume this is because this entrance is harder to find and access, and as such there is no need for a big troop presence, unlike the Gatefront. The bridge giving access to this eastern entrance is guarded by a mad pumpkin, with troops overlooking the bridge on one of the cliff edges. It's possible that the Mad Pumpkin was placed as cannon fodder to alert Godrick's soldiers of any incoming danger. This bridge provides a direct route to Caelid, and from Kenneth Height we know that Godrick was scared of Radahn. Then it is not unfair to assume that Godrick placed soldiers here in case of an invasion by Radahn and his Redmane troops. Killing one of the knights on the horseback in this area provided the gilded Great Shield, the item description explaining that the shield displays a red tinge in the gold coat, mirroring the primordial matter that became the Erd Tree, the colour of homeward yearning. The idea of yearning for what once was is pivotal to Godrick's character, and we will discover this in more detail as we get to Godrick's arena. Towards the northern side of Stormhill, a bridge connecting Limgrave to Lernia can be found. However, the bridge has collapsed. One can only speculate as to why. Perhaps Godrick didn't want another defensive concern, or perhaps the Academy of Raya Lucaria wanted to use Godrick as a safety buffer for any ambitious Tarnished. Nonetheless, a hidden pathway still exists alongside the edges of the castle. If one continues to follow up the main pathway, they will reach the entrance to the castle, where more soldiers surrounded by wooden spikes, as well as a ballista, act as a last defense before entry into Stormveil. Interestingly, if one decides to try and flank round through the bushes, they will be met with several of Godrick's soldiers, underpinning how desperate Godrick is to keep anyone out. Past the castle tunnel, the Tarnished will come face to face with Margit the Fell Omen. It is unclear what Margit's motivations are for helping to defend the castle. However, the most likely explanation is that Margit does not care for Godrick, but is rather preventing any Tarnished from claiming their first great rune. Since many know of Godrick's cowardliness, Margit is ensuring no one has an easy time in gaining Godrick's rune, and therefore an easy time in gaining access to the capital. Looking around the walkway, many swords and shields are present, implying this isn't the first time Margit has battled here. The sky has now significantly changed, adopting a storm-like appearance. Lots of birds, possibly hawks or eagles, circle the castle, perhaps an omen from the previous occupier. What is most striking is the actual castle itself. It's in the process of decaying, becoming derelict and ruined, particularly on the left-hand side. This will become more clear when we discover what lies at the bottom of the castle. We also begin to see a lot more imagery here of the beast Sarosh, whom Godrick clearly admires. Introduced to us by Gatekeeper Gostock and following his guidance to take this discreet path into the castle rather than the heavily guarded main gate, we begin to witness the real destruction that the castle is experiencing. At first, one may think the decay of the castle is perhaps something to do with the strong gusts of wind, but closer inspection shows that the holes in the walls appear to be caused by interior damage. Thorns grow out of the holes, like some sort of curse or parasite. Moving along the rock, the Tarnished will encounter several Stormhawks. It is clear that even these animals have not escaped the horrific grafting procedure, as their talons have been removed, replaced with sharp blades. Additionally, their wings have been partially bound together by shackles to let them fly only within the castle grounds. Godrick's mutilation and enslavement of these Stormhawks is a testament to his cruel and demented nature. Finding the marred shield in this area will give us our first hint that something within the castle itself is creating all these thorns to grow uncontrollably. It is also made clear that the soldiers within the castle itself are no longer the same soldiers patrolling Limgrave. Draped in a red hood and worn down armour, these soldiers appear far more ominous. Closer inspection will reveal that their body is covered in black mottling and the same thorns seen sprouting out of the damaged holes. It is possible that since these soldiers permanently reside in the castle, they have accrued the cursed affliction which plagues the entire area. There's also an implication that these soldiers are actually former criminals who were previously sent to the penal colonies, further reinforcing the notion that Godrick was desperate for any manpower to prop up his army. The same is also true for some of the banished knights we encounter later on in the castle. Continuing along this path, we find a storage room filled with iconography and artifacts taken from Leyndell, possibly when Godrick escaped amongst the women's folk. Upon entering this room, the Tarnished is met with a horrific sight, a grotesque monstrosity known as the Grafted Scion, wanders the room. One can only assume that it's engaging in the process of grafting by the numerous limbs hanging from the ceiling, some already sewn together. At the forefront of this ghastly scene is a large portrait of Godfrey, with the beast Sarosh on his back. The image serves as a reminder to why Godrick began grafting in the first place, in order to emulate the great Godfrey who took the beast regent Sarosh upon his back to suppress the ceaseless lust for battle that raged within. In one of the back rooms, a mound of deceased bodies can be found, with several dogs gnawing on the parts, which presumably were not fit for grafting. Above the rotting bodies, a dead troll hangs, its leg and arm cut off. The chrysalid memento can be found here. What's interesting is if you return to this spot after giving Roderica the memento, her red hood can be found here, implying that Roderica came to Stormveil and left her hood at this site of grafting as a way of leaving her past self behind. Upstairs is a small library decorated in imagery of the Erd Tree. The Mimic Veil is located in this room. The description tells us that this is but one of the items Godrick took with him when he was hounded from Leyndell. We can confirm this from the many statues and paintings found in the storage room. It is also entirely plausible that Godrick used the Mimic Veil to disguise himself as a woman when escaping Leyndell. Making our way down to the depths of the castle, we are first greeted with the sight of many broken statues, and a sinister feeling sets in immediately. Further ahead, an ulcerated tree spirit lives within these dark depths. The bones of skeletons litter the area. It seems that the monster had been living down here for quite some time. Beyond, thorns are growing outwards from a small passage, the same type we saw earlier. What lies ahead is a monstrosity that no Tarnished could have imagined. A hideous brown monster, presumably dead, sits at the end of the tunnel. After dying in spirit, but not in body, this is one of Godwyn's dead corpses, horrendously malformed, and somehow under Stormveil. Everything down here is swamped in cursed thorns, and it is clear that this is where the rot is originating from and causing the castle to gradually decay. Next to Godwyn's body is the Prince of Death pustule, and the item description infers that it is a small fetid piece of flesh from the deformity found down here. Clearly Godwyn's dead body has grown uncontrollably and sprouted from the rock beneath the castle. Perhaps Godrick, in his usual demented manner, likes having this form of Godwyn down here. After all, Godrick would most likely view Godwyn, like he does with Godfrey, as one of the great individuals of the Golden lineage. A bloodstain belonging to Sorcerer Rogier, who the Tarnished can meet in the cathedral above, is present next to Godwyn's dead corpse. His bloodstain actually alludes to the fact that Godwyn's distorted carcass is capable of inflicting serious injury, which is a very frightening thought, particularly if Godwyn was resurrected. Thus, the deformity which is Godwyn's corpse is the Veil in Stormveil, the secret lurking in the shadows.
Mighty dragon, thou'rt a true-born heir. Lend me thy strength, O kindred. Deliver me unto greater heights. Well. The lowly Tarnished, playing as a lord. I command thee, kneel! I am the lord of all that is golden.
After slogging our way through the castle, we finally come face to face with the King of Grafting. When we first meet him, he claims we are playing as a lord, the irony being that this is actually Godrick. The Lord of Stormveil has lost most of his professional army, has no allies, has disgraced the Golden lineage, and has resorted to grafting to temporarily satisfy his inadequacies. Godrick also claims he is the lord of all that is golden, but his grey hair says otherwise, illustrating how far he has strayed from his ancestry. Upon defeating Godrick, his dying words are that he'll return to his home, bathed in rays of gold.
And one day, we'll return together to our home, bathed in rays of gold.
This is the homeward yearning that Godrick so immensely desires, and we can see how desperately he wants to return to the great age of the golden lineage. Dotted around are beds of golden sunflowers, evocative of his lineage and Lanedale. There are also many statues representing the Golden Order, as well as a circular building with the image of the Great Erd-Tree. Inside is a copy of the Elden throne found in the capital, with a statue of Godfrey positioned behind. It is clear that Godrick was trying to recreate certain parts of Lanedale. However, the cursed thorns spewing from Godwyn's body are causing many of the walls here to rot away. On the ground lies Godrick's corpse, providing us a picture into how deformed his own body was, his carcass containing only a part of his torso and head. Interestingly, Gostak, who attacks Godrick's dead body, is missing his lower left arm, replaced by a makeshift knot tied from his clothing. One can only presume that Godrick had his arm cut off for grafting, providing more perspective as to why Gostak harbours such an intense hatred for Godrick. In the middle of the area is the dragon, now headless after the battle with Godrick. It is unknown how this dragon came to die here. Perhaps some of Godrick's men shot it down with ballistas, however there is no evidence for this. Godrick seemed to worship the dragon and its strength, further reinforcing his desire to be a fearsome warrior, and hence why we see Godrick forcefully graft the dragon onto his own body. However, what Godrick fails to realise is that he cannot absorb another being's strength. His endless pursuit to become great has become his biggest insecurity. The first boss that the Tarnished fights in Elden Ring is the Grafted Scion at the Chapel of Anticipation. The Grafted Scion seemingly leaps from the cliff near the Church of Irith, located just outside of Stormveil. It's possible that Godrick actually sends this enemy to the small island, perhaps in order to chop up any Tarnished who would be fresh for grafting. Architecturally, the chapel bears many similarities with Stormveil, such as the golden railings, which are also present in the castle. This, along with how close the chapel is to Stormveil, shows that Godrick's influence is also present here. At the top of the chapel, we find the ashes of the former Stormlord, the Stormhawk King. The item description reads, "This ancient hawk is proud, however, refusing to answer the call to anyone's summons." This seems to be the creature that occupied the area previously, and the Stormlord that Godfrey defeated. Thus, the castle or area was once ruled by an ancient collective of Stormhawks, whom now, thanks to Godfrey and the passage of time, have mostly disappeared. When the Tarnished arrives, some of the Stormhawks have been enslaved, used for Godrick's army, and so perhaps the birds of prey that circle Stormveil are possibly waiting for a return for the true lord of the castle. The first thing I found of notable interest is in the main courtyard area of the castle. There is a banished knight who can be seen mourning a dead helmeted Stormhawk. It shows us that some of these knights actually harbour strong bonds with some of the Stormhawks, possibly like pets or friends. Near the ladders of the siege of Mount Gelmir, a grafted sign can be fought. Did Godrick send one here to gather limbs from the dead bodies for grafting? It would certainly make sense, given that the siege of Mount Gelmir was apparently one of the bloodiest conflicts in the Shattering. Another grafted sign can be found wandering the lakes of Lernia. However, this time it is disguised as a giant lobster. My only explanation for this is that it was deploying the disguise as bait, perhaps to lure Albinaurics for grafting. Godrick was a nasty man who dragged his family's name and reputation through the mud. He was plagued by personal failures that eventually led him onto the path of grafting, causing many in the world of Elden Ring to despise him. Stormveil was turned into a hub for the outcasts of the Golden Order, and eventually the castle itself began rotting from the inside. A far cry from the legendary Stormlord and his Stormhawks who once ruled the area.